Okay, think about this. When a big crisis hits, like a pandemic, maybe an economic shock, massive social stress, we often face this choice, right? Do we just trust professional medicine, the clinical stuff? Or do we lean on, traditional self-help, the wisdom that's already around us? Where does that kind of immediate, accessible wisdom stop? And where does the need for formal, specialized clinical help begin?
That tension, yeah, that's really at the heart of our deep dive today. We're digging into a critical analysis of the book, It's Okay to Reach Out for Help.
Okay.
It's by Malavika Kapur, a really well-respected clinical psychologist.
Yeah.
And this book came right out of the mental health challenges during the COVID crisis.
Okay, so let's unpack this one carefully. Because this book is, well, it's important, and it talks about such a serious need. We felt our analysis needed to be rigorous. We actually believe that some books, they must be challenged, looked at closely. So this critique uses, where it makes sense, a step-by-step critical thinking framework. It maps the claims to the evidence, based on Paul and Elder's work on critical thinking. And we also apply an intellectual framework, drawing from Mortimer J. Adler's ideas. Plus, we use the Golden Rule and even the U.S. Preamble to spot any ethical asymmetries. Then we wrap up with a logical analysis and try to reach a balanced conclusion.
Right, and just so everyone's clear, you're listening to a unique two-host AI conversation. This is powered by Google's NotebookLM, and the idea is to get a deeper, more dynamic book critique.
The context here is just so crucial, especially if you weren't directly aware of how severe things got in South Asia. When this book was written, the world was deep in the COVID-19 pandemic. And in India specifically, the psychological impact was huge. Anxiety, depression, rates were spiking like crazy. And this was happening against a backdrop where, frankly, the formal mental health system just wasn't equipped to handle it. People needed something immediate, accessible.
Exactly, and that desperation really shaped the book's main argument. Kapur's core idea, her thesis, is that emotional self-care, drawing heavily on local culture, local wisdom, using methods people could access right then, was essential. It was like the first line of defense needed to cope with that overwhelming psychological burden, a call to look inward and look local for strength.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting. Applying that critical thinking framework we mentioned, what are the main claims Kapur's making? And how does the evidence she presents actually stack up when you scrutinize it?
Well, claim number one is pretty fundamental. The pandemic caused a severe mental health pandemic. And this claim, it's solid, very robust. The book points to early widespread surveys, national data showing really startling rates of anxiety, isolation, clinical distress across India. That reality, that starting point, it's not really disputed. It sets the stage for everything else.
Right, that part seems clear. The debate really shifts, though, when we get to claim number two. This is the idea that India's indigenous methods are effective for self-care. Now, the book gives some really compelling examples, illustrations, things rooted in the culture that would feel familiar, immediate to people there. But the critique flags a pretty significant gap here. There's limited external empirical data, like comparative studies, quantitative stuff, to scientifically prove these specific indigenous methods work in that way.
Yeah, and it's not just like, oh, they forgot a spreadsheet. It points to a bigger issue, a systemic challenge, especially in places with fewer resources. If something seems to work anecdotally for millions because it's accessible, it's trusted, how do you ethically demand expensive, rigorous clinical trials before you can even suggest it?
Yeah.
That lack of comparative science, that's really the core tension.
And that tension feeds straight into the third claim, doesn't it? The idea that self-care can actually relieve psychological distress, maybe even stand in for formal therapy in a lot of cases. The book backs this up with practical exercises, specific case studies from Kapur's own, long clinical career.
It does. But again, the critique notes that relying on clinical experience, on illustrations, however insightful they are, it means we're mostly in the realm of informed opinion. It's not quite the same as statistically proven knowledge from controlled trials.
Exactly. We've got to separate what's established knowledge, like the fact that distress levels were incredibly high, from what's, let's say, plausible opinion. The opinion being that traditional methods are the best bet for resilience across the board.
That opinion is super valuable. It's hopeful, especially in a crisis like that.
Yeah.
But we need to be clear, its foundation is more on clinical consensus, cultural relevance, rather than hard head-to-head performance data.
So if we try to connect this to the bigger picture, thinking about how the book tries to move the reader intellectually, from just knowing there's a problem to finding a solution that lasts. That journey from facts to wisdom, it's a key concept for Adler we look at.
Right. The book starts by giving knowledge,
Yeah.
making clear how widespread the distress was. That's the first step.
Yep.
Then it guides you towards understanding. It shows how your individual self-care isn't just for you, it links to the health of the whole community. It stresses interdependence. Your well-being helps everyone.
And then crucially, it aims higher for actual wisdom. It pushes past just temporary psychological fixes, coping mechanisms. It emphasizes sustainable practices, things aligned with the culture that become more like a life philosophy.
Yeah, the goal isn't just solving the immediate problem. It's about long-term societal benefit, building more resilience collectively, building something permanent, you could say.
Right, building something deeper. Okay, before we dig into the ethical side of things, let's quickly mention our resource channel. Check out Mindful Moments. That's our YouTube channel. We offer AI book analysis, summaries, critiques like this one, and podcasts too. It's all about inspiring reflection and rational thought.
Okay, so the ethical framework. Kapur's work is so deeply rooted in pushing for empathy, right? And for breaking down the stigma around asking for help. Yeah. So applying the golden rule here feels very natural.
Meaning we ask, does this framework of dignity of care that the book promotes, does it hold up if you flip the roles? Like, what if the mental health pros themselves were the ones seeking help, maybe facing the same cultural barriers or lack of resources?
And the critique finds, yeah, Kapur's principles absolutely meet that reciprocity test. They prioritize the dignity of anyone vulnerable, doesn't matter their status. What's really powerful, ethically speaking, is the argument that self-care, simply by being accessible, promotes justice. It makes mental health strategies available to people who've historically been shut out from formal treatment.
That accessibility, that societal mission,
Yeah.
it lets us kind of benchmark the book's goals against more universal aims. We use frameworks like the U.S. Preamble for this. Now, you might think, why use a U.S. document for a book focused on India?
Well, we use it because those underlying goals, forming a better society, ensuring justice, promoting liberty, they're pretty universal aspirations, right? We're looking for ethical alignment, for symmetries. And the book clearly promotes union community solidarity, peer support. It directly addresses justice by pushing for accessible, low-cost strategies, reducing those inequities. It aims for tranquility by targeting anxiety. And it definitely encourages liberty, giving people agency in their mental health, fighting that awful stigma. Strong alignment there.
Okay, shifting gears to the logical structure of the argument itself. There's a definite strength here. The argument flows very logically. You have the devastating pandemic reality that's the evidence. It inevitably led to this huge psychological toll, which logically demands solutions that are immediate, accessible, community-based site. Those are the claims. The progression feels tight, frankly, very appropriate for a crisis situation.
But what's fascinating, and this is where the critique really bites, is the logical weakness that stems from the book's sheer optimism. The claim that these indigenous methods are sufficient for everyone. Well, that might be an overgeneralization. Logically, it kind of skips over the fact that severe, complex, or really persistent mental health conditions, they absolutely need specialized professional help, often medication too.
That's the critical boundary, isn't it? The one that sometimes gets blurred in self-help material. And we also come back to that empirical weakness we talked about, the lack of comparative quantitative outcome data. That's a logical limitation too, because without it, you, the reader, are left relying mostly on belief, on hope, not necessarily on statistically verifiable effectiveness when you're making really important choices about your mental health journey.
Right. So if we were to sum up the strengths, the book is incredibly practical, it's highly accessible, it's deeply sensitive to the culture it's addressing. By focusing on traditional methods, it does a huge service in reducing stigma and building up those vital peer support networks, essential for resilience during mass trauma.
But conversely, the limitations are just as important to keep in mind. The empirical backing is mostly anecdotal, illuminating stories, yes, but not rigorous trials. And maybe the biggest worry for someone thinking about using these methods is, well, the lack of clear guidance on when to stop self-care and immediately get professional clinical help. Knowing that boundary is crucial for safety.
So putting it all together, what's the balanced takeaway? The conclusion is that Kapur's approach, holistic, community-centered, it's invaluable, truly. It serves a vital, immediate public health function, reducing stigma, building resilience, especially where resources are scarce.
But the critique concludes that the book's deep optimism needs to be constantly tempered. Tempted by the reality that self-care cannot replace professional services for severe cases or for cases that just aren't responding, and it shouldn't be presented as if it can. It's a powerful supplement, maybe a first responder, but it's not the whole picture.
Which leaves us, and you, with a couple of really big unresolved questions to chew on. First, how do these indigenous self-care methods actually stack up against established evidence-based therapies in proper controlled trials, especially when you factor in cultural relevance, which is important? And second, knowing people need help now, how can governments, organizations realistically improve access to formal, high-quality clinical care for those people whose conditions are simply beyond what self-help can manage?
Just to reiterate, this in-depth critical analysis was developed using a precise and systematic book critique framework. It's designed for this kind of rigorous review.
So here's the final thought to take away from this deep dive. If a solution is super accessible, if it's deeply aligned with the culture, especially for a population facing real resource scarcity, is its immediate, maybe anecdotal success actually more valuable in that context than a rigorously tested clinical treatment that nobody can actually get access to?
Click the link you see on screen for the full in-depth book analysis. And please subscribe, share, maybe purchase the book via the link if you're interested. And always think rationally.
See the many genre-based book podcasts at Mindful Moments. Subscribe and nourish your mind on the go.